I'm Ocean. I'm a researcher from UC Santa Cruz. I work under Professor Mircea and Sri. And so I have amblyopia. A lot of you, does anyone know what that is? Oh, we have one. Okay, so it's commonly known as lazy eye, although lazy eye is an umbrella term, but I'll use lazy eye here. So I actually have it, so it's kind of a passion project of mine. So basically the general concept, before we get into it, is I created a virtual reality video game for therapy for amblyopia. And so what is amblyopia? So amblyopia is statistically the most common neurological eye disorder. And in terms of children, it's actually the most common eye disability what's in total. So you can actually treat it. It's traditionally with an eye patch. So basically the idea is you have a strong and a weak eye. And as I said, it's a neurological eye disorder. So the connection between your brain and your eye is the issue. It's not like an eyeball issue. It's a very serious issue because it affects depth perception. If it's very serious, sometimes people can't drive. I can't drive myself. And other cases, it can be really bad for academic performance because it can impact reading, which is very common. And so continuing with that, some more things about side effects almost is therapy for amblyopia has very, very bad compliance. As you can see below, that's actually a pretty stylish eye patch in comparison to what they usually have. It's very piratey, which again, because usually therapy is traditionally done as young as possible. So kids wearing it, you can imagine they might get made fun of. It was previously considered non-fixable in adults. When I was doing my lit review, I found basically every 10 years or so, they're like, oh, we can only treat babies. And then the next 10 years, they're like, oh, well, now we can do 7-year-olds. And then they're like 15. And now they're like, well, maybe all adults, which is wonderful. And usually they find that adults are more fixable with these newer non-traditional therapies. And typically, these newer non-traditional therapies are binocular. So it's totally up our alley. Wonderful, right? And the whole idea is it's actually better if you make your eyes work together than if you just block your strong eye. Yes. So some things I found in my lit review that kind of brought me to my idea was therapy compliance is greatly improved by VR. That's not surprising. VR is wonderful and fun. Neuroplasticity is made more flexible with movement, which we can do in VR gaming. We can make people move. Virtual reality is generally accessible compared to very expensive and niche treatments. And Bangerter foils, which is what I used in my study, it's like, I think you can see it below in the left on that lens. It's a kind of transparent type patch. You put water on it and you adhere it, are very accessible. They're about $8 online, American dollars. And binocular treatments typically have positive results, as previously said, and VR is obviously visually and kinetically manipulatable. Because of the order of the slides online, I've put my novel results first, just a general idea. We had 9 users. We had them do video game therapy sessions for 45 minutes, and we found that their stereopsis test and their visual acuity did increase mildly, which is exciting, very exciting. Another very exciting thing is we noticed that basically we kind of expected, well, they put on this patch on the VR headset, and that'll be very distracting, right? But we actually found that within a minute of gameplay, they didn't notice at all, and they credited this to being focused in the game, which is awesome. Users reported post-gameplay that they felt like they would comply with this therapy. Of course, that's verbal telling us in questionnaires, so that's not necessarily true, but that's what they reported. So the game I made, and I actually made a couple of games, but this is the second iteration that you're seeing, was made in Unity. It runs on the HTC Vive. It has 3 scenes, an instructional scene, gameplay, and a game over scene. I gave them the instructions beforehand, but I also gave it to them so they could see it visually, where we have, if you actually look around in this scene, you can see the different instructions going with the gems. The gems do different things. You can see a dynamite there that takes away 5 points or what have you. So you slash gems for points. It's very much like Fruit Ninja, and there's obstacles. Some ways it's kind of optimized for amblyopia therapy is, again, it requires movement, a lot of movement. So it enhances that neuroplasticity. And it has randomized gems and obstacles, so they obviously can't memorize it since they're coming in multiple times, doing this for a very long time. Some more ways it's optimized is visual crowding. So you might have noticed, wow, there's some really annoying particles. I wouldn't want to deal with those particles in my game. That would be a correct assessment, but they're there very strategically because it's meant to make it difficult specifically for amblyopic people, because amblyopic people have a hard time with visual crowding, where if they are seeing my view, all of you, and say I can recognize 5 of you, but I'm amblyopic. Someone who's not amblyopic might be able to say, oh, I recognize 15 of these people. So in a general landscape, they can, non-amblyopic people can recognize more things. Another thing is we had options for quitting any point. So if you turned around completely, you could slash dynamite, and that was just in case, very rare cases, people get diplopia. So basically double vision, which is obviously very bad, so we wanted to make them have that option to quit at any point. And speeding up, slowing down, we had a very diverse age user group. Some people were very comfortable with games, some were not, so we needed those settings. You can kind of see what they might see with the system on. This is an iteration of my game from earlier on. This is more of like a temple run style game. So the patch might blur it. Our patch was maybe a bit stronger. Yeah. And so our game method protocol, we had 9 users, aged 21 to 48. The average was about 25, so age was 25. So as you can imagine, it was typically college students or just out of college students. It was 5 women, 4 men. The sessions took place in our lab, 15-minute sessions, 3 to 5 sessions over the course of a week to 2.5 weeks. They were encouraged to come in subsequent days, and they wore this Bangerter foil that's pointed to. So I think the one to the right of it is basically about light perception. So it's a very, very strong foil, which is pretty exciting. It replicates about like 2200 vision and visual acuity. Room and lighting was kept consistent throughout, obviously. It was led by our lab assistant, so she's shadowed by 2 optometrists, and her optometrist actually gave us a lot of insight over the course of this project. We've gone through many iterations and tried to make it as good as we could, so it was great. And so we had long-distance visual acuity tests, short-distance visual acuity tests. We had actually 2 of each. One of them was just to throw them off. We got as much data as possible. We also did the stereopsis test, so depth perception. So visual acuity is all about clarity, and stereopsis is obviously about depth perception. Yeah. And so the long distance test, this is an average of our 9 users, and generally positive results. And you can see the pre is before they did the therapy, and the post is afterwards. And if it's 1, that means they got the whole line correct. So each line, if you're imagining, you know, you can see that, I think the Snellen chart there, each line has a different amount of letters. So proportionally, if they got all the letters, it's a 1. If they maybe got 2 out of 3 of the letters, then it'd be 66% or have you. And 0, they got none. And this is the average of all of them. These are the short distance visual acuity test. Again, this one isn't quite as clear as this one, obviously, in terms of it being positive, but in the end, the interesting part is that tip. So one of the things our optometrist mentor was telling us is, if you go into an optometrist and you can't read, say, this line, but then you can read the line after, then they're going to probably credit that to maybe some type of fluke. Because if you can see something smaller very clearly and you can't see the one above it, then that doesn't really make much sense. So yeah, the later data is much more important. And then this is the Randall or stereopsis test for depth perception. Again, pretty positive results, especially considering a shorter amount of time in terms of therapy. And so what does this mean? This supports our lit reviews papers claims that manipulated binocular treatment for amblyopia shows an increase in visual acuity and stereopsis. So we did find that in other papers. VR therapy is effective in treating adults. Required movement seems to increase neuroplasticity. And the whole difference with our paper and theirs is they did it digitally, where they were doing this blurring digitally, but ours is just using that Bangerter foil, so ours is doing it physically. So it's, why would you get these super hard to find video games that are not, they're designed by researchers instead of game designers, when you can just put a Bangerter foil on it and play any of the hundreds of thousands of VR video games available. It's very accessible, anyone can do it. It makes it so amblyopic people have a way better opportunity to better their amblyopia, make their lives better. Our compliance data, all users reporting that the blurring was not a burden in their strong eye after a minute into gameplay. When we prompted them on this, they credited it due to just focusing on the game, all the different colors, all that type of stuff, and so that was really exciting. All the users reported post-gameplay that they felt they would use this type of therapy if they had access to it. Kind of key component if they had access to it. We noticed a lot of people, when they reported if they weren't going to use the therapy, 88% said it would be not having access to VR or the system. And then 11% said they felt like maybe time constraints or something like that, which makes sense. Unpacking compliance, it makes sense. VR is discrete compared to traditional therapies such as wearing an eye patch. I mean, if you're playing a VR video game, as opposed to wearing an eye patch, it's obviously no one's going to know, your friends will know. It's fun, which encourages people to do therapy on their own. They can play any game that they already play. And it's interactive, much more immersive than passive observing, watching a movie, something like that. It really keeps you going. Questionnaire feedback and session attendance shows that compliance would be best if they took home their system. So, if a further iteration of this type of research, if we had them take home the headset, I think it would be much better. Yeah. And so special thanks to these people. They were wonderful. My lab assistant, lots of insight and unity, absolutely wonderful, as I'm sure you all know. Yeah. Any questions?
All right, we do have a couple minutes for questions, so please come up to the microphone, say your name and where you're from, please.
Hello, my name is Kojiro from Osaka Institute of Technology. So I just want to confirm that you don't actually have to prepare any specific games for this treatment. You used your own games, obviously. Wonderful,
totally
yes.
Accessible, yes. Yes. Any questions?
Hi, Vaughan Powell, University of Portsmouth. Lovely talk, thank you very much. Just wondering with your users, was there any disruption to the vision after the event when they actually had finished the study?
No, not that we saw. Do you say disruption or destruction?
Disruption. Anything? Obviously you had the foil on, and once the foil had then been removed, did they experience anything unusual in the vision afterwards?
No, I mean, as someone with amblyopia, it almost feels weird. So I used to wear an eye patch for a long time, and unfortunately it didn't work as well because I did not comply. You have to keep in mind it's almost like going from 2D to 3D vision. So I'm sure to some degree it felt weird, but none of them said that they had any headaches, any dizziness, anything like that, or diplopia, which, yeah, so nothing like that. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right, I've got one last question. I think whenever you take research, you take it into the real world and you're working with patients, you can learn a lot. Is there any lessons that you have for all of us who've been working with real patients?
So you have to keep in mind, my general user base was young people and college students. So I would say mine might be a little bit skewed because a lot of them had classes, so it was kind of hard corresponding things and getting emails all right and stuff. Sometimes it almost felt a little unprofessional because they'd send me like texts. They'd be like, can I have your number? I'll just text you when I'll come in, and I'll be like, I guess. So I feel like I'm a bit skewed on this. I actually might not have the best opinion, but yeah, working with users is actually great. Yes?
Very briefly, I had a similar question, but about the specialists, in this case, the optometrists. How were they able to cope with this and to collaborate in these experiments?
Yeah, so Miranda was mentoring with the optometrist, so basically it was really through her. So any questions we had or any type of insight we wanted, it was completely through her. So it was very secondhand, but we were